Thanksgiving was always a tense affair in my family, but that particular year, it escalated dramatically. I'm Aaron, 31 years old, and for most of my adult life I've preferred to stay out of the limelight. I was always the reserved one. Dependable helper, content with little attention. I simply remained in the background, handling tasks as they arose. Perhaps that was my error. When people grow accustomed to your quiet presence, they often begin to overlook you entirely. My brother Luke was the family's golden child growing up. Star high school quarterback, he earned a college scholarship. Pursued a business degree, he constantly commanded attention. My parents, especially my mom, would visibly brighten when he entered a room. "That's my boy," she'd declare proudly, as if introducing royalty. I, on the other hand, was just Aaron. I maintained good grades, kept to myself, secured a job right after college, and steadily built a stable, unassuming life. Yet none of my efforts ever seemed to register. The ironic part? I was the one discreetly ensuring everything stayed afloat. About 5 years ago, my dad faced a health crisis, forcing him to reduce his work hours. Expenses naturally continued. So, I stepped in, covering the mortgage, utilities, and a portion of their medical bills. It wasn't meant to be a permanent arrangement, just my way of contributing. I believed family supported each other, or so I thought. The more I assisted, the less they appeared to acknowledge it, or perhaps they did notice, deciding it was simply my duty. Luke never contributed a cent. He'd arrive at holiday gatherings in his latest designer suit, regaling everyone with tales of conferences in Dubai or Toronto. Mom would hang on his every word, treating him like a business prodigy. Dad would merely nod, sipping his whiskey, offering little comment. And me, I'd typically be in the kitchen, checking the oven, serving food, or tidying up. That Thanksgiving unfolded like all the others. I arrived early to assist Mom with preparations, though. She offered little more than a curt "the potatoes need mashing" by way of greeting. No embrace, no smile, just instructions. As always, I nodded and began working. Luke appeared an hour later, carrying a bottle of wine and a new girlfriend, Danielle, who seemed barely old enough to drink. Everyone fawned over her while I setting. The table remained completely unnoticed. Dinner followed the familiar pattern, Mom boasting about Luke's latest achievements, and Luke presenting himself as a pioneer of hard work. Danielle's laughter at his jokes was loud and forced. I simply sat there, meticulously cutting my turkey, chewing slowly, and staying silent until the conversation took a sharp turn. It began innocently enough. Mom remarked how pleasant it must be to live alone, implying my life was easy. I tried to deflect with a light-hearted comment, something like, "Yeah, the mortgage fairy certainly helps with that," but then she fixed me with a cold, piercing stare and declared, "You know, Aaron, you've always acted like you're doing us some huge favor. You're not. You're just a burden. Always have been." The table fell silent for a stunned half-second. I actually blinked, convinced I'd misheard. Before I could utter a word, Luke chuckled, shook his head, and added, "At least I make this family proud." There it was. That cutting remark, a direct hit. The casual way he delivered it, as if it were an undeniable truth, as if I should already accept my inferior status, made something inside me go utterly still. I slowly set down my fork, pushed back my chair, and stood. I didn't speak, didn't erupt, didn't even glance at any of them. I simply walked out, grabbed my coat, got into my car, and drove home. The drive was eerily quiet. I didn't even switch on the radio. My phone vibrated once or twice, likely texts from Mom asking my whereabouts, or perhaps Danielle attempting to smooth things over. I ignored them. I drove in silence, parked, went inside, and sat on my couch for a long time, lost in thought. I replayed every bill I'd covered, every quiet sacrifice, every instance I'd been there when they needed something: rides, groceries, last-minute repairs. I reflected on how I had never once received a word of thanks. Not once had anyone said, "We appreciate you." Instead, I was labeled a burden immediately after peeling potatoes for 3 hours, and once again covering their mortgage. For a while I felt adrift. Anger simmered, yes, but more profoundly, I felt numb. It was as if I had finally grasped a truth I should have recognized long ago. They didn't view me as family. They saw me as a resource, a convenience, a walking ATM. So I stopped abruptly. No more payments. No more silent assistance. No more being the family's punching bag. I sent no message, offered no explanation. I simply let it all go. I canceled the autopay, deleted the bill reminders from my calendar, and resumed my life. Weeks later, my phone rang one afternoon. It was Dad. He rarely called me. Mom usually handled family matters. Seeing his name, I hesitated but answered. "Hey, Dad," I said. His voice was rigid, annoyed. "Aaron," he stated, "why is the mortgage unpaid?" Without missing a beat, I leaned back in my chair and replied, "Ask your pride and joy." Then I hung up. That's when things truly began to unravel. After that call, the silence was deafening and revealing. No one reached out, not Mom, not Luke, not even a half-hearted, "Are you okay?" It was as if they expected me to come crawling back the moment consequences hit. Viewing my absence as a mere tantrum, temporary. They didn't grasp the reality yet, but they would. 2 days after Dad's call, I received a text from Mom. No greeting. No context, just, "We need you to sort out the mortgage before it affects our credit. Don't be childish." Childish, that was her chosen word. Not "we're sorry," not "let's talk," just a cold, clipped command. I stared at the screen for a long time, my thumb hovering. I could have unleashed years of bottled resentment in a lengthy message, but I didn't. I left it on red and put my phone down. If they wanted to perceive me as a mere component in their system, so be it. We'd see how they managed without me. The repercussions materialized slower than I anticipated, but they did arrive. I began hearing whispers through extended family, primarily from my cousin Rachel, who lived near my parents. She called me one night, her voice laced with nervous laughter. "Just a heads up. Your mom's been telling people you're going through something, that you're not well lately." My stomach clenched. "Not well," I echoed. "Yeah," she said cautiously. "Mental health issues, saying you're having some kind of breakdown. Say you're unstable." Lashing out. I obviously didn't believe it, but she's painting a picture of you being completely off the rails. I closed my eyes and took a slow, deliberate breath. There it was, classic deflection. Instead of confronting the truth, they were fabricating a narrative portraying me as the problem, making it seem like I'd snapped, that I was unreliable, erratic. It was simpler than admitting they'd relied too heavily. For too long, finally breaking the very person who had propped up the family. I shouldn't have been surprised, yet it still stung. What truly affected me, however, was their handling of Christmas. For the past few years, it had always been at my place, largely because I had the space and the patience. I handled the decorating, cooked the dinner, and bought thoughtful presents. Even when money was tight, I ensured it felt special. But that year, I didn't invite them, said nothing, assuming they'd understand the message. Instead, they hosted their own gathering without informing me, then posted numerous smiling group photos on Facebook. Luke was grinning beside Mom, Danielle holding a glass of wine by the tree I'd bought them last year. The caption read, "Grateful for family. Some people may leave, but the ones who matter always stick together." It stung more deeply than I expected. I wasn't even angry at first, just hollow, as if I had finally been completely excised. They didn't miss me. They simply filled the void I left and carried on. The cracks, however, soon became apparent. Rachel called again in mid-January. "You're not going to believe this," she began. "Luke's in trouble." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of trouble?" "He quit his job." I blinked. "Why?" "Claims he's launching his own venture, some consulting business. But the rumor is he was forced out. Something about misusing company funds. Something shady. No one's revealing the full story." That caught me off guard. Luke had always been the golden boy, certainly, but not precisely the picture of responsibility. Prioritized appearances, expensive cars, flashy watches, designer suits, For years, I'd quietly wondered how he sustained his lifestyle without repercussions. Now it seemed they had finally arrived. I didn't comment to Rachel at the time, but a quiet thought stirred in the back of my mind. They'll come knocking. Again, and they did. It began with a lengthy message from Mom, unusually sweet, almost theatrical. "Hey, honey, I know things have been tense, but family is forever. We all say things we don't mean sometimes. Can we talk? Maybe have dinner soon? I'll make that roast you like." I didn't reply. No. 2 days later, another message arrived, this one from Dad. Again clipped. "We're going through a rough patch. Mortgage is 2 months behind now. Your mother's upset. Can you please help us out? Just this once?" I stared at my screen and simply laughed. Just this once? I'd been providing silent, unacknowledged assistance for years. And now, after being labeled a burden and discarded, like a shameful secret, they expected me to step in again, just this once. What struck me most was their profound lack of understanding regarding their actions. To them, I remained the backup plan, the quiet one, the helper. They hadn't grasped that my silence wasn't temporary, that I wasn't returning. Still, they persisted. Luke called one night. I let it go to voicemail, then listened once, and again, just to confirm what I thought I'd heard. "Hey, Aaron, look. I know things got out of hand, but, you've always been good with money, and I've got this business idea that could really take off. I just need a little startup capital. Thought maybe you'd want in on the ground floor, like an investment. Win-win, you know." I sat in stunned silence. It wasn't even an apology, not a genuine one, just a sales pitch. As if I were a venture capitalist, not his brother. As if he hadn't openly mocked me at Thanksgiving while I silently bore the weight of his parents' financial stability. Something within me shifted after that call. My quietude had been about hurt, but now it was about clarity. I finally saw them for who they truly were, and more importantly, what I was not to them. I wasn't family. I was a resource. The moment I ceased to be useful, they twisted the narrative to cast me as the problem. But now, I wasn't just done. I was done being agreeable. That's when I began formulating a plan. I didn't rush it. Not the dramatic type, never one to yell, throw things, or storm out demanding recognition. No, I preferred quiet departures, subtle moves, allowing silence to convey my message. But when someone attempts to demonize you simply because you've stopped sacrificing for them, it strikes a deeper chord. Begin to realize that silence alone won't suffice. Not this time. It's the betrayal that fundamentally altered everything. Arrived about a week after Luke's voicemail, I was at work, reviewing reports at my desk, when an unknown number called. I almost let it ring, but an instinct urged me to answer. "Aaron Miller," a polite but firm voice inquired. "Speaking this. Is Kevin Brooks with Lakeshore Lending. We're calling to follow up regarding your recent mortgage application." I froze. "I'm sorry, what application?" The man paused. I heard papers rustling. "This is the application submitted on January 11th for a new loan on 324 Linton Avenue. That's your listed residence, correct?" I slowly leaned back in my chair, the air feeling thick around me. That was indeed my address. My house. "Hold on," I said, striving to keep my voice steady. "I didn't submit any application." More silence. Then Kevin cautiously asked, "You didn't authorize Luke Miller as a co-signer on this application?" My stomach churned. "No, I absolutely did not. I asked him to send over the documentation." He agreed. I hung up and sat there, stunned, staring blankly at my desk. 10 minutes later, the email landed in my inbox. Attached was a scanned PDF. When I opened it, my name and information were plastered across the loan documents. Alongside Luke's forged signature and a fabricated income statement, he had even submitted my bank details accounts I hadn't shared with anyone in years. Most insultingly, the intended use of funds box was checked. Capital for family business venture. I saw red. He hadn't just tried to exploit my generosity. He'd attempted to steal from me. He tried to leverage my house to fund some doomed scheme, the very house I'd worked overtime to afford, the same house they conveniently overlooked when they called me a burden. It was as if years of being disregarded, dismissed, and manipulated converged into that single moment. Every time I'd let something slide, every time I'd swallowed my pride and met their demands, it had led me to this precise betrayal. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just sat there, still numb, like the aftermath of a car crash where your body is intact, but your mind hasn't caught up. Then slowly, I opened a new browser tab. I started by emailing my lawyer, Marissa, whom I'd used a couple of years prior for a work-related issue. I wasn't sure if she'd handle a personal case, but I laid out everything: the forged documents, the bank information, the unauthorized loan application. I sent the PDF, attached screenshots, and included Luke's voicemail. Within 20 minutes, she responded, "I can help. First step is locking down your credit. Second step is reporting this to the authorities. Third step is deciding how loud you want to be." That last line resonated with me. How loud do I want to be? My entire life I'd been quiet, avoiding conflict, prioritizing peace over confrontation. But now they had crossed an unforgivable line. Luke had tried to shackle me with debt without permission. My parents had painted me as unstable to mask their own neglect, and when I stopped giving, they didn't question why, simply demanded more. No, this time I would be loud. I would be undeniable. I didn't respond to anyone that weekend. Ignored texts, didn't answer calls. I spent the entire time meticulously reviewing old receipts, bank records, and emails. I constructed a detailed timeline, every payment I'd made for my parents, every mortgage deposit, every expense I'd covered. I labeled, dated, and organized them into a pristine folder. I wanted a paper trail so clear it could cut glass. Monday morning, I filed a police report for attempted identity theft and fraud. I handed everything over to Marissa, who drafted a cease and desist order for Luke, legally prohibiting him from accessing or using any of my financial records or personal information. She also included a clause to safeguard my house from any further unauthorized activity. And for good measure, I froze all my credit accounts, changed every password, and set up two-factor authentication on everything. Luke would never get near my assets again. 3 days later, Luke called. This time I answered. "Aaron," he began, as if we were old friends. "Hey, listen. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Save it." He stopped. "What?" "I know what you did. I have the documents." The bank called me directly. "I've already filed the report and you'll be hearing from my lawyer." There was a pause, then a nervous laugh. "Dude, come on, it wasn't like that. I needed a little help, man. I figured we'd both benefit. It's not like I was going to mess you over or anything." "You already did," I stated flatly. "Oh, you just didn't expect to get caught." "Okay. Look," he said, his tone rapidly shifting. "Let's just be real for a second, all right? You've always had it easy. Live alone. No kids. No real responsibilities. You can afford to float some cash. Trying to build something? You're just sitting there. Why not do something that actually matters for once?" That was the moment I realized he genuinely believed it. It wasn't merely manipulative. He truly thought he was entitled to my life, my money, my home, because in his mind he was more significant. I was just the quiet one, the background character, the fallback option. I hung up without another word. That marked the true beginning of the fallout. The ensuing days were among the most challenging I'd faced in years. It's not because of Luke's actions by then. I'd secured everything. My house and finances were safe. No, the true burden stemmed from something deeper, colder. I hadn't realized how desperately I still hoped my family would come around. That perhaps after everything they'd acknowledge their wrongdoing, they'd apologize. Maybe I'd hear Dad utter something, anything, about how wrong things had become, how far they'd gone. But the silence conveyed everything I needed to know. No one called to inquire about the true events. No one reached out to say, "We're sorry Luke did that." Instead, they doubled down. Rachel called again, her voice hushed, as if she feared being overheard. "Aaron, just so you know, your mom's telling everyone you're trying to get Luke arrested. She said you're making it all up to get back at the family." I didn't even respond. I simply stood in my living room, holding my phone, gazing out the window. It was a bleak, overcast day, one of those afternoons where the world seems to hold its breath. But inside, something within me had utterly deflated. They were once again painting me as the antagonist because it was easier than admitting their failure. It's easier than confessing they'd leaned on me like a crutch for years, then kicked me when I stopped supporting them. I started skipping meals. Unintentionally. I'd simply lose track of time, then realize it was 10 p.m. and I hadn't eaten all day. My sleep became fragmented. Some nights I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every instance. I'd smiled through pain just to maintain peace. The breaking point wasn't a dramatic event. It was a Wednesday morning. I opened the fridge, saw a half-empty carton of eggs and stale bread, and realized I lacked the energy to prepare anything. So I just sat on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, staring blankly for nearly an hour. That was my nadir. My quiet rock bottom, no tears, no shouting, just emptiness. In that moment, I didn't crave revenge. I didn't even want closure. I simply wanted to stop caring. I yearned to erase the need for their approval, to finally accept that it would never come. That nothing I did would ever be sufficient for them because they never truly desired my success. They merely wanted me to remain in my place. Useful. Invisible. Silent. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I packed a bag, got into my car, and drove to the lake. There's a small cabin there, nestled among tall pines, with a rickety little dock that creaks underfoot. It had belonged to my grandfather. He left it to me when he passed, likely because I was his only visitor. I hadn't been there in almost 2 years. No cell service, no noise, just wind, water, and the sound of birds cutting through the trees. I stayed for 3 days, telling no one, bringing no laptop, just a notepad, some books, and a thermos of coffee. I sat by the water, walked the trails, allowed my mind to settle, and slowly, effortlessly, a plan began to form. Not one of vengeance, but of liberation. I had clung to this ideal of family for so long, believing that if I just proved myself enough, they'd finally see me, love me, be proud. But that version of family didn't exist, at least not with them. So I began contemplating how to walk away, not out of malice, but out of necessity. Upon returning home, I initiated changes. First, I removed my name from everything connected. To my parents, no more emergency contacts, no shared financial accounts, nothing that could link me to them. Contacted the bank, ensuring they flagged any future attempts at joint applications or requests under my name. I also granted Marissa, my lawyer, power of attorney to act on my behalf for any related matters. She was more than willing to assist, especially now that the situation was escalating. Then, I quietly began exploring job transfers. My company had out-of-state branches in Oregon and Colorado. I didn't inform anyone yet. I simply wanted to explore the possibility of a fresh start, to live where no one knew me as the disappointing son or the overlooked brother. I wasn't rushing it, wasn't making a grand announcement. But for the first time, I felt like I was building something for myself. Still, as I took steps to distance myself, I knew it couldn't end this way. Not entirely, not without the truth emerging. Because they were still out there telling people I was unstable, that I was the problem, that I'd abandoned my poor, struggling family after all they'd done for me. And that lie, I couldn't let that stand. So, I waited. I remained quiet. Behind the scenes, I was preparing my final move. Because the moment would come when they'd push one step too far again. When they tried something new, I'd be ready. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly, piece by piece, I began rebuilding my life. This time, however, I was constructing it on my own terms. No guilt, no obligation, just quiet, deliberate choices made solely for myself. The first significant change originated at work. I'd held the same position for 5 years, a project analyst for a logistics firm. I found it tolerable, but I'd never truly strived for advancement. I always kept my head down, accepting extra assignments without complaint, just as I had at home. But after everything that transpired, something clicked within me. I stopped waiting for my efforts to be acknowledged and began speaking up. I presented a new client retention model during a team meeting, a concept I'd been refining in my spare time for months. Our regional manager was impressed. Within weeks, I was presenting it to the executive team. A month later, they offered me a position in their new Portland, Oregon office, complete with a title promotion, a salary increase, and, best of all, a relocation package. I didn't accept immediately. Not because I lacked interest, I was very interested, but because I needed to ensure my decision was for the right reasons. I spent a weekend wandering through my apartment, touching every drawer, every photo frame, every subtle reminder of who I once was, the son who paid and stayed, forever awaiting a sliver of appreciation that never materialized. By Sunday night, I opened my laptop, drafted the acceptance email, and hit send. Just like that, I had a clean slate. I sold my house within 3 weeks, fetching above the asking price. The market was booming, and I'd maintained the property meticulously. I didn't inform my parents about the move. Not that it mattered. The only communication I'd received from them since the fraud incident was a vague, passive-aggressive voicemail from Mom. "Hope you're happy now. Your father's blood pressure's been through the roof. We'll just have to figure things out without you." I deleted it without responding. The move itself felt surreal, like shedding an old skin. The drive up the coast was long, but remarkably peaceful. 700 miles of fresh air and distance between me and everything that used to weigh me down. The Portland office was modern, bright, and filled with individuals who knew nothing of my past. Here I wasn't the quiet one. I was the person behind the retention model that saved the company $1.2 million in the second quarter. People sought my opinion. My manager included me in high-level meetings. I began mentoring new hires. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly seen. And with that newfound visibility came leverage. I launched a side business, something I'd contemplated for a while. I built a website that helped small businesses streamline their delivery logistics using simplified tools I've developed over the years. I didn't anticipate much, but within 6 months, I had a dozen clients and more than enough additional income to completely alleviate my financial anxieties. I joined a hiking group, started seeing a therapist, and even took a pottery class, of all things. I wasn't attempting to find myself. I was simply, finally, granting myself permission to be more than what my family had dictated. With each step, my confidence grew, as did my clarity. The greater the distance I gained, the more apparent the pattern became. My parents weren't just toxic. They were obsessed with controlling the narrative. As long as I remained quiet, they could portray themselves as loving, self-sacrificing parents mistreated by their ungrateful son. Luke was the success story. I was the failure who became strange and distant. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly foresee, was that I had been meticulously documenting everything. Emails, voicemails, bank statements, text messages, all neatly organized in a cloud folder, and with my lawyer's assistance, I'd filed a civil complaint for attempted fraud and identity theft. It was a slow-moving legal process, as always, but it was real. Eventually, Luke would be served. But that wasn't even the most exciting part anymore. No, what I was truly anticipating was the moment they'd try to reel me back in again, because people like that always do. They'd wait until financial strain resurfaced, until Luke's next grand venture collapsed, till Dad's blood pressure became more than just a weaponized voicemail. Then they'd reach out, full of saccharine apologies and desperate charm, and this time I wouldn't just ignore them. This time I'd answer, but not as the silent son they once relied on, but as the fallback plan. I'd answer as the man who no longer needed them, who had rebuilt his life from their wreckage and stood taller than they ever expected. And I wouldn't just walk away. I'd burn the bridge they constructed. But first, I waited. And as I waited, I grew stronger. Because sometimes, the best retribution isn't about what you do, but about who you become. And I was becoming someone they would never recognize or control. I had no idea what was coming next. It was early spring when the opportunity finally presented itself. Not with a dramatic flourish, but with an unassuming email buried amidst spam. The subject line read, Miller Family Mortgage. Urgent inquiry. Initially, I dismissed it as junk and almost deleted it. But then I noticed the sender, an assistant manager from a small regional bank back home, that caught my attention. Opened it, read it twice, then leaned back in my chair, quietly stunned. The message was brief, stating a delinquency had been reported on a property I was previously associated with. They were reaching out because my name was listed as a prior financial contributor on the account. The address was familiar, my parents' house, the same one I'd paid the mortgage on for years, the same one I'd stopped paying after Thanksgiving. I called the bank directly. The woman who answered, polite but clearly overwhelmed, confirmed my suspicions. The house was in pre-foreclosure. Payments hadn't been made in over 4 months, and the balance had ballooned with late fees. She asked if I intended to help bring the loan current. I smiled and replied, no, but I might be able to assist in another way, because that email wasn't merely a warning. It was a window, a small fracture in the wall they'd tried to erect without me. And through it, I could see everything beginning to crumble. I contacted Marissa the same day. She pulled the public records and confirmed the foreclosure notice had been filed. Even better, the bank had sent multiple notifications, meaning the clock was ticking. The property would be listed for auction within 60 days. That's when it clicked. They were going to lose the house. The house they always claimed would be passed down to Luke someday. The house Mom had once called our legacy. The house I'd kept afloat for years while they treated me like a live-in ATM with no emotional value, and now it was about to be seized, unless someone intervened, unless someone bought it. That's when the idea began to solidify. It started as a faint spark, a petty notion, quiet what if, but the more I considered it, the more I realized it wasn't solely about revenge anymore. It was about closure, about reclaiming something that had always dangled over me like an unattainable prize. And this time, I wouldn't just earn it. I'd own it. I had the resources. Between my new salary and the steady income from my side business, I was in the strongest financial position of my life. I reached out to a realtor friend in Portland, explained the situation, and asked if she could discreetly monitor the foreclosure process for me. She was curious, perhaps a little concerned, but she agreed. Then I dug deeper. Rachel, bless her heart, still kept in touch. She didn't know the full scope of everything. I didn't want to involve her completely, but she knew enough to keep me updated. One night she called and shared something that brought the entire picture into sharp focus. So Luke's back living with your parents, she said. His startup's gone. Danielle left. Apparently he was borrowing money from everyone. Friends, old co-workers, even Mom and Dad. They're broke. Aaron, I leaned back in my chair, nodding slowly. Are they selling anything? Yet? But your mom was at church last weekend whispering about needing a miracle, whatever that means. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence for a long time. It was time. I contacted a local investment group specializing in acquiring distressed properties. I didn't use my name, opting instead for a shell LLC I'd established months prior for tax purposes. Marissa assisted with the paperwork. The plan was straightforward. When the house went to auction, my group would bid discreetly, quietly, and once the dust settled, I'd be the owner. But that wasn't all. As I put the pieces into place, another document resurfaced, one I'd almost forgotten, a notarized statement that had drafted years ago when I first started helping with the mortgage. It detailed my financial contributions signed by my parents, acknowledging that I had covered over $90,000 in payments and repairs. As a gesture of goodwill and support, Marissa reviewed it and smiled. If they ever contest your purchase or try to claim the property was unjustly taken, this will bury them. It wasn't just a receipt. It was protection, leverage, proof that I wasn't some estranged son attempting to steal the family home. I was the one who'd saved it until they turned on me. Now, I was simply reclaiming what they'd discarded. I took the final step. I arranged to fly back home the week before the auction. Not to incite drama, but simply to be present, to observe, to witness firsthand the moment they realized their golden son wouldn't be their savior. Because this time I was done being quiet. I wasn't just walking away, I was walking back in. But on my terms, and they wouldn't see it coming. The flight home felt surreal. It had been nearly a year since I'd departed, since I'd packed up my life and driven 700 miles north, vowing never to look back. Now I found myself gazing out the window of a half-empty plane, watching the city I'd outgrown slowly reappear. But I was no longer the man they remembered, and I wasn't returning to seek reconciliation. The auction was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Thursday. It was a modest courthouse event, no fanfare, just rows of rigid chairs, a wooden podium, and a bank-appointed auctioneer rattling off properties as if reading overdue library books. I arrived early, dressed sharply, but unassumingly, in dark jeans, a pressed shirt, and a blazer. I sat in the back, quiet and unnoticed. The bidding began slowly. I waited. When the property at 4131 Willow Bend Lane came up, a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, the same one I'd supported for years, the auctioneer barely raised his voice, starting at $242,000. Do I hear 242? One bidder, a woman I didn't recognize, likely a house flipper, raised her hand. Do I hear? 245. My agent, representing the LLC, confidently raised her paddle. 245. Thank you. Do I hear 250? Another bidder joined in. A mild back and forth ensued, a few nods. A few counters, no drama, until the price hit $260,000. That's when the other bidders withdrew. The room fell silent once more. 260 going once, twice, sold. The gavel fell. Just like that, it was mine, my house, or at least the house I had paid for. The house they pretended was never mine. The house they said would belong to Luke because he'd have a family someday. That house now belonged to my LLC, and they had no idea. I didn't show up at the house that day. I wasn't seeking a confrontation. Yet, I wanted the paperwork processed first. Deed transferred, locks changed, everything finalized and clean. That took about 9 days. 9 days spent in a quiet hotel just outside town, walking by the lake, sipping black coffee in the mornings, sleeping more soundly than I had in years. 9 days, while the storm quietly brewed in their lives. Rachel texted me on day 7. Luke's freaking out. Got some notice taped to the front door. Your mom ripped it off, but she's been crying ever since. They don't know what's happening. They thought they had more time. I didn't reply. On day 10, the sheriff delivered the final notice to vacate. That night, I drove to the house, not to gloat, not yet just to observe. I parked across the street, engine off, headlights dimmed. It was dark outside, late enough that the neighborhood was quiet. The porch light was still on. Through the front window, I could see my mother sitting at the kitchen table, shoulders hunched, hand wrapped around a mug as if it were her only anchor. Luke stood behind her, pacing. My dad sat stiff and silent, looking older than I remembered. I watched them like strangers, and in a way, that's what they had become. They had no idea they were sitting in my house. The next morning, my property. Manager hand-delivered the final document, a formal notice of ownership and intent to renovate the property, effective immediately. Inside was a personalized letter, carefully worded by my lawyer. It read, "This property is now under new ownership. All prior occupants must vacate by Friday. There will be no further extensions and no exceptions. We recommend securing alternate housing immediately." It was signed by me. Not as Aaron, but as the managing partner of the LLC. I hadn't planned on seeing them. But fate, or perhaps karma, had other ideas. The following day, I was leaving a downtown bakery when I spotted them all three, Mom, Dad, Luke standing outside a bank across the street, huddled together like a storm-battered flock. Mom looked pale and frantic. Dad was rubbing his forehead. Luke was on the phone, barking into it, his face flushed. I don't know if the bank had denied them another loan, or if it was the landlord of some rental they were pleading for. But they looked utterly adrift. For the first time, they seemed like the ones who didn't belong. I remained across the street. I didn't wave, didn't approach. but I did make eye contact with my mother. For one long second, she froze when she saw me. Her lips parted as if to speak, but she didn't. She just stared as if unsure if I was real or some ghost from a past she'd never imagined would return with such power. I held her gaze, gave her the slightest nod, then turned and walked away. That night, I received a text. It was from a number. I didn't recognize it first, but I instantly knew the tone. "Why are you doing this to us? We're still your family." I didn't reply immediately. I let it sit. Then, after a full day passed, I wrote back, "No, you were my family, and then you showed me what that meant to you. This is me finally listening." They never responded. 2 days later, they were gone. No forwarding address. No farewell. The house was empty. And for the first time in years, so was the weight on my chest. The following week, I walked through the empty house. It was quiet, eerily so, the kind of silence that clings to walls after years of noise and memories. But this time, the quiet didn't sting. It felt clean, like the end of something burdensome. The kitchen still carried faint scents of cinnamon and old coffee. Though all the furniture was gone, they'd taken what they could. The table, the inexpensive wall art, Dad's old recliner where he used to doze off nightly, they left behind the photos. Faded school portraits of Luke. Graduation shots. It's a family Christmas picture from 15 years ago where I was half cropped out of the frame. In the back of a closet, I found a dusty shoebox with my name on it. Inside were childhood drawings, a couple of old report cards, and a wrinkled thank you note I'd written my mom in 3rd grade after she packed my favorite lunch. She'd kept it, apparently, or perhaps she simply forgot it was there. I didn't take it with me. I left it in the box because that version of Mitha, one who craved their affection, who tried to earn a place at the table by paying bills and enduring insults, no longer resided there. I closed the box, then locked the door. Word spread. I didn't disseminate it. I didn't need to. This town thrived on whispers and backyard gossip, and it didn't take long for people to piece together what had transpired. Rachel informed me that my mother began telling people I'd tricked them, that I'd stolen the house while they were vulnerable. But the truth had receipts, bank notices, court filings, a paper trail so extensive and clear, it shredded every lie they attempted to spin. And the best part, it wasn't just about the house anymore. Luke's fraud case progressed. The forged loan documents, the identity theft attempt, it all caught up with him. My lawyer submitted everything to the authorities. Investigation was discreet but thorough. A few months later, I received a message from the county clerk's office. Luke had accepted a plea deal, fines, probation, and a permanent blemish on his record. Nothing dramatic, no orange jumpsuits or breaking news, but it would follow him for the remainder of his career. The golden boy had finally learned the meaning of a fall. As for my parents, they moved in with one of my mom's cousins out of state, a small dwelling shared with another family member. Rachel said they despised it. No privacy, no control, no pedestal to stand on. They tried reaching out one last time. An envelope mailed to my new address, handwritten, pleading for reconciliation. I didn't open it. I dropped it into the shredder without reading a word, because forgiveness isn't owed. It's earned, and they never once tried to earn it. 6 months later, the house was fully renovated. I didn't move back in. Instead, I transformed it into a transitional home, a place for young adults aging out of foster care who needed a safe start. I partnered with a local nonprofit, established a trust in my grandfather's name, and quietly began funding it from the income of my expanding business. That house had once symbolized control, shame, and who they believed deserved what. It offered a second chance to someone who never had one. I visited once, late in the evening, after the new residents had moved in. The porch light was on. Laughter drifted from the windows, warm, alive, real. I stood on the curb and took a deep breath. Then I smiled, because the house no longer carried their legacy. It carried mine. And I built it with everything they tried to take from me.